Morning, Year 12s. We're still on chapter 4 of UK government, so we're studying the relationship now between Parliament and the executive, okay? And what we're concerned with here is this question, primarily this question. So, how effective is Parliament at holding the executive to account? Now, the Google slides will be up on Google Classroom, and what you'll be required to do is work through a couple of tasks in regards to the mechanisms used by Parliament to hold the executive to account. So you'll be required to use a card sort to fill out a table. And what we're going to be doing is judging the effectiveness of all of these different mechanisms used by Parliament to hold the executive to account. So we've got obviously Prime Minister's questions, we've got ministerial questions such as urgent questions asked by backbench MPs. We've got the House of Commons Select Committee, so that includes the Departmental Select Committees, the Public Accounts Committee, as well as the Liaison Committee, which holds the Prime Minister to account twice a year, and that comprises all of the chairs of the Departmental Select Committees. And we've also got the House of Lords, as well as the opposition parties and backbench MPs. So, what we need to do before we go any further is unpick this critical question. So, how effective is Parliament holding the executive to account? Now, obviously, what we mean by the executive when we studied Unit 3, the Prime Minister and the executive, is government. Okay, so we're concerned with the core executive here. Those 100 people, the Prime Minister, his or her cabinet, and the junior ministers and the senior civil servants which make up that core executive, which are responsible for the creation and formulation of governmental policy. And what we mean by holding the executive to account is Parliament's critical function. So going back to Unit 2, Parliament now, Parliament's critical function of scrutiny. As we know, Parliament has many different functions, such as legislating, which means basically the passage of legislation through Parliament. Parliament's responsibility is to pass legislation and see that legislation through as laws which govern the land. And we've also got then Parliament's function of legitimation, as Parliament and MPs within Parliament represent the people, the electorate within the UK. Parliament acts on our behalf to legitimise and approve any legislation which is passed through the House of Commons and the House of Lords. We've also got then the key function of representation. Now, representation is, of course, this is just a little recap, split into political and social representation. Political representation, of course, is how well the electoral system that we have, first past the post, translates votes into seats. And then we've also got social representation, which sort of asks the question of whether Parliament, both institutions, both Houses of Parliament, the House of Commons and the House of Lords, looks like the wider UK population in terms of gender, ethnic minorities, and LGBTQ. So what we're concerned with here, though, is Parliament's key function of scrutiny. Okay, how well do they hold the government? How well do they hold the executive to account? Okay, and what we need to do is we need to judge how effective Parliament is at holding the executive to account. And what we need to unpick, therefore, and what we need to decipher is what we mean by this word effective, okay? Now, what we mean by this word effective is change, okay? So how much change is actually taking place as a result of all of the scrutiny that Parliament is constructing of the executive branch, okay? So, for example, has the government, and what we mean by the government is, of course, is the executive, has the government considered and implemented the policy proposals and the amendments suggested by the House of Commons Select Committees? For example, backbench MPs, either the governing party's backbench MPs or the opposition backbench MPs, the opposition parties in general then, of course, and or the House of Lords. So if we are to say that Parliament is effective at holding the executive to account, okay, we need to see change to policy proposals and amendments to those pieces of legislation as a result of the scrutiny conducted by these various people or bodies, okay? What we mean by ineffective then, on the other hand, is if there has been a lack of change, okay? So if the government has failed to listen to the policy proposals or the amendments suggested by either of these groups of people, then we know that parliamentary scrutiny of the executive is ineffective, okay, because there's been a lack of change to those piece of legislation or those bills, which means that the government is actually failing to listen to all of these various groups of people in these bodies.